Everyone, good afternoon. This is Mark Dempsey with the National Convergence Technology Center. Thanks for joining us for our very first Brown Bag webinar series, a half-hour midday talk. So today we have with us Joe Hillis, who's the Operations Director of the IT Disaster Resource Center. He's going to talk to us about what that organization does, some of the challenges involved with that. And if you didn't already do so, please put your name and school in the chat box. We're doing a pretty good job here of recording off the participant list, but just to make sure, please put your name in the chat box so we can get you. Thanks, Joe, so much for taking the time to talk to us. It's great.
Thanks, Mark. I appreciate that. Thanks for the offer and the honor of being the first. I didn't realize that was coming. I probably would have set out for a couple of months had I known that. So thanks, everybody, for taking time out of your day to be here. I'm Joe Hillis. I'm the Operations Director for ITDRC, or the Information Technology Disaster Resource Center, or however you want to truncate that. I'm based in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, which is where ITDRC is headquartered. We're about a 12-year-old organization, for those that have never heard of us. So we are a nationwide organization. We're volunteer driven. All of our folks work in the tech sector somewhere as a rule. So folks just like yourself, as well as people that work for some of the most recognizable names in technology. And so really what ITDRC is just kind of a vehicle, if you will, for people who want to use their skills and resources for good to help communities after a disaster. So we're vendor neutral. That's probably the most important. I mean, we love them all. And so we also realize that, each of our volunteers brings something, brings their expertise in whatever technologies that they work in. And so that really makes this a great collaborative environment. So we keep one foot kind of in the emergency management space and the other in the technology space. And that is just because after a disaster, communities don't want just anybody coming in. They want it to be a trusted resource, preferably somebody they have a relationship with. And so that's what we kind of do in our blue sky days is we have, division and regional directors, and I'll show you a little bit more about that in a bit. But, we liaise with the community to try to understand, in the event of a disaster in their area, what are the needs going to be? What do we bring to the table? What do you have, that we can help with, and things like that. So that said, just a little bit about the organization, and we have about 2,250, or I think 2,260 whenever this was pulled, credentialed members. Those are what we consider individual resources, people that don't necessarily work for an HP or a Google or a Microsoft. There are folks like yourselves that may or may not, that may be working independently or volunteering independently of your employer. We say that we have a surge volunteer pool of about 5,000, and that's because we've got relationships with a lot of the large manufacturers or tech companies where we can reach into their volunteer pools to draw on resources for things like that. And unfortunately, I don't remember exactly when this slide was done, but over 130 state and federal disaster responses in the last 10 years or so, more than 1,000 communities served. So population served is always that, who knows? We take our best estimate based on the community we're working in, the geographic area that we're serving and whatnot. So little over 12,000 individual tech assets, things that we have distributed, through our caches coast to coast. And I think this was, we say it's a $5 million value. So I think one more boring statistic slide just kind of gives you kind of a snapshot of our progression over the years as our responses have increased, as the number of sites that we've increased. You can certainly up to 2019, or so looking at last year's stats, where we had 16 federally declared disaster responses. They don't necessarily include our service projects or training events and things like that. So this year has kind of blown that out of the water. I don't have to tell anybody that. Just kind of a little footprint of where we are right now. Green dots are live sites. Last time I looked, I think we had 903 open sites around the United States. Majority of these, and I say the majority, a good number of these are post-disaster. We don't necessarily leave a community after a disaster. We'll provide them with the tools that they need. Long-term recovery is a super long process, multi-year process. And so we'll help these communities, the organizations, whether it's, a national nonprofit or something like that, that's in helping with the rebuild of the community. We'll help with them by providing, resources for them. So we want them not to worry about technology. We want them to worry about, putting sheetrock back in people's houses and things like that. And so any way that we can help as an organization to kind of take that off their plate, we're willing to. Of interest is when you do have a federally declared disaster, there's always a cost to the community. And in some cases it's 10%, sometimes it's 25%. So at the end of a hurricane, the community, it's at the county level, will come in and tally up all of their expenditures for that disaster. FEMA pays the bills. So at that point, it's up to the community to kind of pay their offset for that. So whether it's the 10% or the 25%, depending on the type of a disaster. And that number can bankrupt a community, and I've seen that happen around the country, certainly in rural areas where, excuse me, they just didn't necessarily have the reserves to do that. But the neat part about it is the fair market value of the things that we do, and not just us, but any voluntary organization. Every pallet of water, every case of diapers, if a community can account for that and can track that as it comes in after a disaster, then they get to count that towards their soft match. And so just in the case of like the Joplin tornadoes of 2011, they had 100,000 volunteers come in the first year after that, and they paid zero out of pocket towards their federal match. So there is some value to what we bring to a community, or some additional value what we bring to a community besides just the resources. So how do we figure out our cadence here? I mean, life safety always gets the first cut at our resources. I'm not going to read these all to you, but just kind of give you an idea of the things that, when there is an emergency in a community and we're called in, these are the people that we kind of reach out to first to make sure that they have, connectivity or whatever resources they need from a technical perspective. Life safety, mass care, and that's, of course, feeding and sheltering is a big thing, especially, in hurricanes, wildfires, things like that, where you're displacing, tens of thousands of people. Pre-COVID, they were, going to gymnasiums or going to schools or to churches. And of course, now kind of in the COVID times, a lot of them they're using hotels now. And, so just most recently, like with, I say most recently, but like with Hurricane Laura, which was kind of the big, Southwest Louisiana, landfall, a lot of those folks, came to Dallas, but a lot of those people went to New Orleans, and, New Orleans, that was a challenge for them because they're not used to hosting people there. They're used to, pushing people out of their county when they have a hurricane coming. So, we provide things, to help take care of the people, and whether that's, tablets, so they can, internet cafes and things like that. Those are the types of things we do. Community recovery, we kind of break that into two things. There's short-term recovery, all the things that happen right after a disaster when the voluntary organizations come in. There's just a lot of temporary things that happen for that, period of 6 weeks to 3 months after a disaster. And then it kind of transitions into long-term recovery. And that's the rebuild process, which, is certainly a super long time. Organizationally, and I guess I should say, feel free to jump in, throw questions up. I'm not necessarily attending actually I'm not looking at the comments. So if you have questions, feel free to dive in and we'll take a deeper dive. So organizationally, we are kind of broken up. We have volunteers in 10 regions across the United States. We have 35 or so people that are in Puerto Rico as well. That was a capability, just an area of focus for us after, hurricanes Irma and Maria back in 2017. So, that certainly has paid off for us, just in us, building that contingent down there, because, in January of this year, they had the string of earthquakes down there. And so we already had people, equipment, everything in place. And so we were, immediately on the ground to respond to the earthquakes. We do have equipment caches really from coast to coast. In some cases we have, a corner of somebody's warehouse. In some cases they're just, rental storage type places. But places where we can, get resources delivered or pulled in into a community a lot quicker. We do have a disaster tech task force program, which includes a lot of the larger tier 1, tier 2 type names, and some of the partners are Microsoft and HP and Dell and Google and Red Hat. I always feel bad running down this list because there's so many of them that actually participate in this, but we're kind of the convening organization, if you will, for them during a disaster, where we can all get around the table. We can all kind of attack issues in a community, together, kind of with a unified front. And so I think we've really been building on that since 2017, which was the first time we really brought everybody together. The rest of it is kind of specific type things, but we have different types of mobile command centers, and I don't know if I have pictures in the slide deck of those, but anything from they're rated by capability, and so for example, a Type 4 being the smallest in this case, could be just a small trailer that it has one operator workstation in it, up to our largest mobile command center, which is like a semi-trailer which seats 25 people inside of it. So each of those have different capabilities and capacities, and so we have one of each, or at least several of each in some cases. Just some of the certifications, things for incident management, things for the disaster response piece. So the incident command system is kind of what all of our people are trained in. Not necessarily because they're running the disaster, but because we function within the incident command system. So we want everybody to understand that if you have a question, you don't really go to the head guy. Just communications falls underneath logistics, and so they need to understand where we fit into that kind of the food chain there. But anyway, and I guess lastly, just to highlight, we do have what we call critical information systems response team. All the members of that team, are members of the FBI's InfraGuard program, so that assures a public trust background check, and those are folks that we can put without any question in front of a government partner somewhere. On the asset side, pretty much anything technology wise, I mean, we are our cash, like I said, 12,000 plus assets, and so we have kind of a little bit of everything. I guess when we talk about technology, it's kind of intentionally what's obscure, if you will, and it's just because you just never know. I mean, we probably have a skill set inside the organization for most technologies, but in the same breath, we quite a bit of that old legacy technology stuff, which we sometimes run into, whether that's, finding a SCSI terminator or something like that, just for an old technology to be able to bring an old system back online somewhere. Those are the types of things that we have. So I won't read each of these, but just to kind of give you an idea, these are some of the things that we bring to the fight. So we don't necessarily do a lot of individual end user type stuff. Typically we do emergency services support, as you saw in our matrix before. They are typically the first consumers of our service. A lot of times it's connectivity, it's temporary infrastructure. The city hall has, is uninhabitable because of the hurricane, or city building has been evacuated for whatever reason, and they need to set up in a temporary space somewhere. So we do provide a lot of, temporary infrastructure, just kind of in the interim, while a disaster is going on. Survivor support, mentioned the mass care earlier, and that is, setting up Wi-Fi and shelters, putting, public computers in there, TV programming, that's kind of a big thing. So put a TV in the corner, for the kids to watch cartoons, put other TVs in other areas where the adults can either watch the weather or the sports or whatever that is. So anything to try to kind of take their mind off of being stuck inside of, a place for a period of time. And in some cases, they're stuck there for weeks. So I think for us, it is, how do we keep the folks, still connected while they're displaced? Cell phone chargers, I mean, that's been the, kind of the thing for the last few years, which is most people leave home and they don't necessarily have a way to, charge that cell phone. So we put the charging stations in to give them an opportunity to stay connected. Supporting the nonprofits, that's really a focus area for us. Again, like I mentioned before, if we can, take some of this, offload some of this for them, then they can just work on, dealing with the survivors, evacuees, whatever that is. And so a lot of cases, it's just, kind of like the picture shows. I mean, it's just temporary hardware, temporary environment where they can get online, do their registrations or whatever those are. But we do quite a bit of that. There's a lot of temporary things, processes that stand up, for example, the food bank, your food bank may take over an old mall parking lot, for example, because they've got just, tons of 18-wheelers coming in, and so they turn those into distribution sites. And historically, they don't necessarily have an infrastructure there, but we'll provide a temporary infrastructure while they, receive the stuff, receive the orders, do their, warehousing and things like that. So the disaster response team, I mean, we kind of break our folks into two buckets, and I guess maybe we subdivide from that, but we actually have the people who are, willing to field deploy into a disaster. And they typically come from all backgrounds. I mean, they generally always have a tech skill set of some sort, but they usually bring some sort of previous life experience. Myself, I was in public safety for 24 years prior to this. So I have, fire, EMS experience that I bring, and we find that there's a lot of our membership that brings similar things, whether it's search and rescue backgrounds or something like that. So won't bore you with the skill sets because you are tech people, and you're probably understanding that the majority of these things are things that people on your own staffs bring as well. We do, because we bring everything ourselves, we do have our own logistics support team, and that is to help us set up our temporary operating spaces, or FOBs as we call it, a forward operating base, where we can bring in our mobile command centers. We'll bring our own housing in, or trailers to sleep in, may bring our own showers in or things like that. But we rely on our logistics team to kind of help us with that, to move our stuff, to move our people. Obviously just to refuel, just to empty the toilets, things like that. Those are all things that we kind of lean on our logs team for. So there are roles there, because we do have people that are members of the organization who may not necessarily have a full-on technical skill set, but they're able to work in supporting the rest of the operations. In our remote response team, which is kind of all-encompassing. So again, we do have folks that are not able to deploy for whatever reason, whether they just don't care about it, or they're just not physically able, or whatever that is. And so these are some of the remote tasks that we have that we can keep people involved. Certainly during an event, and whether it's just as simple as letting us know about ground truth, watching the news for us, getting scraping social media for what's really happening there. Mobilization is another thing. We have to move these people around, rent cars for them, fly them, put them up, whatever that is. So there's certainly a number of opportunities within the organization to participate, but yet not necessarily deploy. So I think I mentioned earlier that we're kind of, how we're divided up. We do have a West, a Central, and an East division. And then we further break that down by, we follow the 10 FEMA regions. So you can see there are 3 or 4 regions which are part of a division. So that is kind of how the organization is broken down. When there's an event somewhere, we do reach to the local region to, mobilize them first. And then obviously, depending on the size of the event, we'll certainly reach into other regions, or, reach to our national membership. Oh, and I forgot about the little stars. So these are the primary areas where our large logistics caches are. Since we're based in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, most everything comes through here. We do have a logistics base in Northern California, as well as in Virginia and in Puerto Rico. And so we have other assets, sprinkled out, whether it's, a trailer in Wisconsin or something like that. So some of the things we've been doing lately, I guess one of the teams that we have also is that we do have a damage assessment team. It's mainly a tech-centric, a tech-focused team. And so this is a recent deployment that we've done for the Creek Fire, which was in California. For certainly in COVID times right now, it's difficult, and all of the federal agencies, even state and local agencies, they're not necessarily deploying people. They're trying to deploy as few people as they can. So we have, since 2018, helped communities with, whether it's street view damage assessment or whether it's aerial stuff, providing them with the imagery that they can do remote damage assessment. So we can take this, the video stuff, we can upload it somewhere and they can sit behind their desk or home or wherever that is. And, they can figure out which homes as a rule, which ones are damaged, destroyed, whether how many street signs need to be replaced, things like that. So those are some of the areas that we will help the communities with. One of, I guess, the Pearl Hill fire in Washington, I understand that there was a large fire there, and I think it took out many miles of fiber. I know that there was a FirstNet radio tower that was down, and I know that they had asked us to come in and do a microwave shot. I mean, this is kind of a neat picture, but the other pictures surrounding it, I mean, couldn't see the other end of where the tower shot or where the microwave shot was. And so they called it a double blind shot, which I thought was kind of neat because they had no communications to be able to talk between the crews, nor could they see where they were going. So they were kind of relying on their expertise and experience to be able to sight this in. And they were actually able to sight in this multi-mile shot, within just a few hours. So pretty impressive there. Hurricane Laura is probably one of our has been our biggest event this year. This was the hurricane that came end of August, I guess, came in Southwest Louisiana for probably a good 100 by 100 mile area or so. They had they lost their majority of their power and their communications infrastructure, as well as you can see the types of damage that was there. So anyway, we've spent quite a bit of time down there, and still, and we'll be working down there for the foreseeable future. So one of the things, I guess I just dropped this slide in here because this is one of the things we were doing, and we've done this for years in helping communities, and whether it was the city of Houston or wherever that was. But one of the areas that ITDRC is able to help is helping do network assessments or infrastructure assessments after a large-scale disaster, and what's standing, what's not standing, what's viable, what's not. And so this is one of the big things that we were able to help with. I mean, you look at your own internal tech teams, and certainly in Calcasieu Parish, where this is, I think they had 70 schools, 72 school facilities, I think is what it was. And so, between their 3-person network team and their security people, whatever, they just didn't have enough smart hands to go out and do these assessments. So these are areas that we can help, and these are areas where actually you can help, understanding what it's like to manage an entire infrastructure like that. Imagine having to rebuild that in a short period of time. So I think this is another one of our recent ones. I think there was a double dam failure up in Michigan, central Michigan. It certainly took its toll on these communities. I got it updated from them yesterday, and there were about 300 homes that were on well water. And so of course, once these dams lowered, then now there's 300 homes without water, period. So we certainly are helping with extending communications up there, making it where the residents who have chosen to stay are still able to get connected somewhere, get connected back to the internet, keep in touch, to check on their FEMA claims and things like that. So some of the things, this happened to be a microwave relay shot that they did off of a silo there, which was kind of neat. So, and the one I guess that maybe everybody's dealing with right now is COVID. COVID for us, I'm just going to give you a quick, I think I got these out of order just a little bit, but we've had a little over 1,000 requests right now since COVID started for assistance, whether it was, for devices for medical testing, or whether it was devices for folks who are quarantined in hospitals or things like that. Certainly a lot around the education space where they weren't able to get the students connected in rural and underserved areas. Those are places where we kind of stepped in. So for us, it started back at the end of January. I don't know if you remember the first repatriation flight that came back from China. We received a call from the state of California and just said, hey, we're going to put these 200 and some odd people somewhere. And so right now it's going to be an airplane hangar until we figure out a better solution. So our first activation related to COVID was to provide Wi-Fi inside of the shelter here. And then I think we got into some bigger things. This happens to be like a large COVID testing site in San Francisco. They had, once they saw their numbers rise, they decided they were going to COVID test an entire census tract. So I think it was a 4-day testing event. So we provide the technology to do things like this. Temporary stuff is really where we kind of rock this, where they may need 100, 200 computers or something like that for a short period of time. These are places we can step in and help in a super quick. So if you remember back, COVID was originally thought to be just kind of a short-term event. We were just going to kind of close the doors for a couple of weeks and kind of pause. Since in the interest of time, I think I'll just say that, ITDRC, because it was a federally declared disaster, that kind of unlocked our resources for that. And so for us, it was, what can we do as an organization to kind of help this? Because the digital divide, it didn't take very long before that really kind of reared its head. And so for us, it was, making connectivity available to the students that weren't able to get on, or the families that weren't able to go to the Starbucks or the school, the library, wherever it is that they normally go. So we set out to install Wi-Fi in rural areas. I think this particular one serves about 20 families in rural Washington state. This is another one. Libraries was a big focus for us, and believe it or not, this is actually a library, and yes, we did put a Wi-Fi hotspot there. And we got into the rural and into the urban areas, and this particular one happens to be in Detroit. And I think they normally have about 5,000 kids a year that come to this community center. Obviously, the doors were closed for that. So, we were able to extend Wi-Fi across the street to where they could, come still get online, still stay socially distanced, but still stay connected in some way. So our projectConnect obviously has been a hit. I think to date, we've done, somewhere around 600 public Wi-Fi hotspots around the country. We still have, quite a few that are in the pipeline. So, so as I come to the close, just to, your takeaway, I guess, for this is just that, ITDRC can help with, technical needs for anything kind of disaster related. Regardless of what that is. We know that a disaster is going to require more resources than what any community has. And so, feel free to refer us or lean on us or whatever that looks like, to be able to help with, some sort of, technical assistance, whether it's just guidance, whether it's connectivity or connections or whatever that is. Just, some of the things that, like I say, that we do the most is internet hotspot type things, phones, charging stations, hardware, and we do it pretty much for anybody. So